What can be said about the 1910s? This was the era of the Expressionist art movement, the Titanic, the rise of radio, and of course, the First World War, which changed virtually every aspect of daily life. During the early 1910s, the growing popularity of electricity, automobiles, airplanes, and telephones inspired a cultural attitude of optimism, and this changed dramatically by the start of World War I. Millions of men were sent to fight overseas, which sparked an air of anxiety and instability. To maintain emotional resilience, the general public embraced patriotism and extensive underconsumption in a time of limited resources. With these historical events, the desired aesthetic changed dramatically from the extravagant lacy Edwardian style to an aesthetic of structured, utilitarian silhouettes. But make it fashion. There's a broad cultural context that brought rise to specific trends during this time. And back then, people couldn't make or edit videos about these topics, and they especially couldn't use Descript. Descript allows for a faster editing process for anyone from beginners to professionals. Imagine all the time you'll be saving with audio being edited for you. If you want a smoother editing experience, you can click my affiliate link in the description. Early 1910s fashion held on to some remnants of the previous decade, including large hats, parasols, and S-curve corsets. For details on those, you can check out my video on the Gibson Girl aesthetic. We're going to explore how fashion trends change from the beginning to the end of the 1910s. So now, let's get started. The early 1910s were a continuation of the opulence of the Belle Epoque period and the Edwardian era. In the world of fashion, there was an emphasis on sophistication and being of a certain status, or at least appearing so. The popular silhouette shifted towards softer, flowing designs, which started in 1910. The Ballet Russe's Paris show of Scheherazade revived an interest of Orientalism in Europe. This brought bright colors, natural lines, and a return of silk fabrics in European fashion. In the midst of this trend, Paul Poiret took a lot of inspiration from various Middle Eastern and East Asian cultures, and was one of the biggest trend makers of the early 1910s. On top of that, archaeological discoveries, such as the excavation of Pompeii, inspired a return of neoclassical aesthetics. Designer Lady Duff Gordon brought further attention to this trend, with her designs featuring draping Grecian silhouettes. She was also one of the 705 passengers out of 2,200 who survived the Titanic, and was mentioned in the Titanic movie as a naughty lingerie designer. But of course, that's not all she did. The early 1910s was an exciting period of classic luxury combined with innovative modern styles. There were several fashion trends that evoked these sensibilities, including kimono-inspired coats and robes. Designed by Paul Poiret, this style was a popular form of day and leisure wear for the wealthy, and was one example of how fashion was moving towards relaxed and looser-fitting silhouettes, as well as reflecting the aforementioned Orientalist craze. While not directly resembling a kimono, this was a reinterpretation of traditional Japanese clothing. This design featured wide sleeves and straight flowing lines, and most importantly, since this look wasn't very form-fitting, you didn't have to wear a corset while wearing this. While Poiret took inspiration from Japanese cultural clothing, he didn't acknowledge their origins, and you could argue that the Orientalism trend of the 1910s, which he greatly contributed to, was one of the first instances of cultural appropriation in Western fashion. Fur. Like real fur. Pieces made by fox, mink, and chinchilla fur were especially preferred. Clothing made with fur was very expensive, and was somewhat of a status symbol. For people who lived in cold climates, this was also seen as practical wear, since open carriages and early automobiles didn't protect from frosty weather. All you could rely on was a warm coat, but in some circles, fur was seen as tacky, due to it being seen as stereotypical splurges for new money women, chorus girls, and sugar babies. In one of Flora Kickman's Flower Patch books, she complains about the inappropriate, vulgar, inartistic fashion of trimming frail transparent dress material with fur. To quote Eve from Life Size, "You should love animals, not wear them." Hobble skirts. I've previously mentioned the style, questioning if this was one of the worst fashion trends in recent history. And given how fashion is cyclical and there's basically no comebacks for this trend, it's definitely up there. The hobble skirt is another creation by Paul Poiret, and is said to have been inspired by kimonos again. But in 1908, during a Wright brothers demonstration, Edith Agibly Berg was the first American woman to fly as a passenger in an airplane. To avoid her skirt blowing in the wind, she tied a rope around her ankles. Seeing how she walked after leaving the aircraft, Perret was inspired to create a new design. These skirts were slim-fitting around the knees and ankles, and as a result, movement was very restrictive. All you could do was take small steps at a slow pace. Due to its impracticality and unconventional design, the hobble skirt was kind of a meme for its era. There were cartoons and satirical articles making fun of the style, where the women who wore it were caricatured as mindless trend followers. There are even hobble skirt races for public entertainment. As popular and joked about as these skirts were, wearing them was potentially dangerous. Since you could barely go on stairs in these, hobble skirts have caused quite a few injuries, some of which were fatal. Trends may come and go, but a broken ankle, or worse, can take a long time to heal. Tango boots. After arriving in Paris from Argentina, the rest of Europe and the US enjoyed a tango craze, mostly because it was seen as risque, but still chic. The associated tango boots had a lace-up design on the leg, which showed the leg lines of the dancer, but with a changing fashion silhouette, shoes were becoming more visible, and this style was a signifier of trendiness and allure. Empire dresses. Neoclassical styles returned in the 1910s, with, again, the help of Paul Perret, where he created a design dubbed as the Josephine dress. These formal evening gowns included a high waistline just below the bust and a loose fit around the waist, with the S-shaped corset, which caused an unnatural posture, slowly fading away. This design was marketed as refined and graceful. Around this time, the Delphos gown, designed by Henriette Narin, and her husband, Mariano Madrazo, was also popular. This dress was inspired by the sculpture Charioteer of Delphi, and was noted for its silky pleating, constructed with panels of vertical waves. Empire dresses becoming trendy again marked the beginning of the end of the corset era, and if you squint, hinted at the suffragette movement without being overtly political, since the suffragettes viewed corsets as oppressive and advocated for dress reform. This neoclassical look was a fashion staple for this specific time period, since basically any movie and TV show set in the early 1910s featured an empire dress. Moving towards wartime aesthetics, anyone who has taken any history class would know that there isn't a clear answer on how the First World War started. After the slaughter of Franz Ferdinand in 1914, some empires got mad at each other, and then their allies got dragged into things. It was a mess. Dubbed as the War to End All Wars, World War I involved over 30 nations and changed essentially every aspect of everyday life. And due to mandatory military service, the American Army would join the battle in 1917. All that could be done was to accommodate this temporary new normal with hard work, patience, and hope that one day all this chaos will eventually end. With men fighting overseas, women began working outside the home to make up for labor shortages, increasing the female workforce population by 1 million. To conserve resources for the soldiers, the United States Food Administration launched a campaign encouraging the public to cut down on their food consumption. Businesses and households also reduced or turned off heating on Mondays to conserve fuel. In a time where food and heat were rationed, fashion was definitely put on the back burner. Fabric companies prioritized creating military uniforms, which caused less clothing for civilians being produced. On top of that, notable fashion designers, including Paul Perret and Jean Pitot, put their businesses on hold to serve the military. Several fashion houses were either temporarily stopped or ended during the war. With less clothing being produced in general, the new style was appearing structured, durable, but with a glimmer of style. Though this was a time of hardship, several fashion trends still existed, including no more corsets. This was one of the most impactful changes for wartime fashion. Typical corsets included metal for its construction, but during the war, as much metal as possible were needed to make weapons and other war supplies. In 1917, chairman of the U.S. War Industries Board, Bernard Brosh, even asked women to stop buying corsets to conserve steel, and this suggestion worked. The decline of corset sales saved enough material for the U.S. government to build 2 battleships. And as mentioned before, with the growing women's rights movement and fashion moving towards straighter silhouettes, corsets were increasingly regarded as tired and old-fashioned. Though Valerie Steele, director of the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology, states, women never really gave up the corset. They internalized it through diet and exercise. Darker colors. The era of cream-colored and pastel Gibson girl designs were over. Well, kind of. During the war, darker colors became more prevalent in fashion, reflecting the somber mood of the era. Darker hues were seen as more durable due to fabric rationing. Colors like navy, deep gray, and plum also matched the color palette of military uniforms, reflecting how the First World War was an aspect of everyday life. And with society under strain, it was encouraged to blend in, rather than stand out with bold colors. Military jackets and trench coats. Oh my god, pockets in women's fashion. Wild. This trend demonstrated the structured and functional style that fashion was moving towards, and of course, was inspired by the military. Trench coats, designed by Burberry, were designed for the army, but caught on in fashion for it being waterproof and comfortable in cold weather while being lightweight. The use of unique fabrics, colors, and waist-cinching belts added a sense of style in these otherwise utility-inspired designs. Smaller hats. The large cartwheel hats of the turn of the century got shrunken down by the start of the war. Since less material was available for fashion, designs had to be simplified, resulting in smaller shaped hats. They were still decorative, but foremost practical and wearable. World War I was not a time of exuding over opulence. Even trendy hats had to be restrained, but they were convenient for travel and a faster pace of life in wartime. Shorter hemlines. Hemlines were shortened, usually at calf length, to conserve material. Some shorter, full-length skirts were known as war crinoline and were seen as patriotic, as seeing a woman in this style would boost morale of soldiers who took a break from being on the front lines. There definitely was a culture of looking pretty, not for yourself, but for others. But that's a whole other topic. With fashion moving towards simpler and straighter lines, shorter skirts were more flattering for this new silhouette. The style also symbolized a departure from the past into a more active, modern woman. The 1910s, including World War I, feels like a strangely forgotten period in history. This decade isn't very romanticized. It's regarded as a period of overcoming hardships rather than nostalgia. Despite that, the 1910s was a massive cultural turning point. While the war halted the pace of fashion, this decade marked the beginning of more practical styles for women's everyday wear. Corsets were fading away, and hemlines would only become shorter in years to come. While the First World War ended in November of 1918, this was still in the midst of the Spanish flu panorama, which didn't end until April of 1920. This period of stress and uncertainty would make way for the glitzy, glamorous, jazz, and cocktail-fueled decade-long party of the 1920s, which we'll look into in the next episode of the series. Thank you all for watching, and hope to see you all in the next one.